Welcome to the HFY Tales channel. Remember to like and subscribe if you like the story. Enjoy and take care.
The jungle moon of Orvin. For was no place for the faint of heart. Thick vines dangled from towering trees, their leaves wet with a dew that seemed more alive than the creatures that prowled the shadows. Every sound, chirps, growls, distant roars, echoed in the oppressive air, a constant reminder that survival here was a fleeting achievement. High above the forest floor, perched silently in the canopy, Velthara waited. Her armor, sleek and shimmering in hues of green and silver, blended perfectly with the foliage. Her eyes, a predatory amber, tracked the lone figure below with unyielding focus. A human, smaller than I expected, she murmured to herself, a hint of disdain lacing her words. She tapped a finger against the hilt of her blade, studying his every move, yet still alive. Interesting. The human crouched beside a stream, his movements calculated, his every action deliberate. His clothes were torn, but his body was lean, muscular, built for endurance. He wasn't just surviving, he was thriving. John Cross. The name on the Krenax database had piqued her interest. A mere soldier, stranded on this hostile moon, yet somehow alive months after his crash. Velthara's lips curled into a faint smile. His file suggested tenacity, but the reports couldn't capture what she saw now: adaptability, awareness, and an uncanny calmness that belied the chaos around him. The thought unsettled her. Could it be true? She whispered. Have we underestimated them all this time? John stood abruptly, his sharp gaze scanning the trees. He gripped his makeshift spear, every muscle in his body tense. His voice broke the jungle's eerie silence. I know you're there, he said, his tone low but commanding. You've been following me for days. Care to show yourself? Velthara froze. A human, sensing her? Impossible. Her training as a huntress made her one with the shadows. Yet there he stood, unflinching, as if daring her to come closer. The moment lingered, and for the first time, she hesitated. Hours later, back at her hidden encampment, Velthara replayed the scene in her mind. The human had called her out, not with fear, but with defiance. She traced a finger along the edge of her blade, contemplating her next move. Humans, she muttered, her voice dripping with contempt. Weak, fragile creatures. Yet this one. Her wrist communicator beeped, pulling her attention to the glowing display. The matriarch's voice crackled through, cold and commanding. Report, Huntress. Have you acquired the specimen? Velthara straightened, her pride refusing to betray her moment of uncertainty. Not yet, matriarch. He's different. Different. The word was spat back with venom. You're wasting time. Bring him back or find another. Velthara's jaw tightened. He's the one, she said firmly. I will prove it. The line went silent, leaving her alone with her thoughts. She glanced toward the jungle, where the human would undoubtedly be preparing for another night of survival. You want me to show myself? She muttered under her breath, a dangerous glint in her eye. Very well, John Cross. Tomorrow, you'll know what it means to be hunted. The next morning, the jungle awoke with its usual chaos, a cacophony of shrill cries and the rustle of unseen creatures moving through the underbrush. John had learned to listen to the jungle's rhythm, to pick out the sounds that didn't belong. Today, there was something different in the air. He crouched low, sharpening the tip of his spear against a rock. His eyes scanned the surrounding foliage, his ears straining for any sign of movement. It was too quiet, as if the jungle itself held its breath. She's still out there, he muttered, the memory of yesterday's unease lingering like a shadow. For days, he'd felt eyes on him, the prickling sensation of being observed by something or someone intelligent. He played it safe, staying near natural barriers and setting traps around his camp. But he wasn't naive enough to believe the jungle was the only thing hunting him. A low growl snapped him from his thoughts. High above, Velthara watched as the skirls closed in. Their sleek, black forms moved like shadows through the underbrush, their glowing yellow eyes fixed on their prey. John, let's see how adaptable you really are, human, she murmured, her voice barely audible over the jungle's hum. The Skrull moved in formation, their coordination impeccable. Velthara had chosen them for this exact reason. They didn't just hunt, they strategized, herding their prey toward dead ends or ambush points. A lesser creature would panic, fall into their trap. She leaned forward, anticipation tightening in her chest. How would he react? John heard the growl again, this time closer. His eyes darted to the underbrush, catching a flicker of movement. He rose slowly, spear in hand, his body coiled like a spring. 3 of them. They emerged from the shadows, their black fur shimmering faintly under the canopy's dappled light. Skrulls, he muttered. His grip tightened on his weapon. Damn clever things. The predators began to circle, their movements methodical. One let out a guttural snarl, a sound that sent a chill down John's spine. He had seen their kind before, fast, intelligent, and relentless. They didn't attack until they were sure of the kill. John's mind raced. Running was pointless. They'd catch him within seconds. Fighting head-on. Risky, but he'd done it before. His eyes flicked to a nearby tree, its branches low and thick. Right, he said under his breath. Time to even the odds. Velthara's eyes widened as John sprinted toward the tree. The Skrulls lunged after him, their claws tearing into the soil. He leapt, grabbing a low-hanging branch and pulling himself up with surprising speed. "What are you planning, human?" she whispered, intrigued. From his perch, John broke off smaller branches, using a jagged rock to sharpen their ends. His movements were quick, precise, born of experience. Below, the Skrulls snarled and circled, their glowing eyes fixed on him. John didn't waste time. With a sharp whistle to grab their attention, he hurled one of his makeshift weapons. The projectile struck the lead Skrull in the flank, eliciting a pained yelp. The creature staggered, limping back into the shadows. Another sharp throw, another hit. The second Skrull retreated, leaving only one. Velthara leaned back against the tree trunk, a small smile tugging at her lips. This was no mindless brute. The human was resourceful, using the terrain and his wits to overcome superior predators. "Not bad," she admitted, her voice carrying a hint of admiration. But she wasn't done testing him yet. John climbed down cautiously, spear in hand. The final Skrull lingered, its yellow eyes watching him warily. It let out a low growl before retreating into the jungle. John exhaled, his muscles still tense. He turned in a slow circle, scanning the trees. "All right," he called out, his voice sharp and challenging. "You've been watching long enough. Show yourself." Velthara stiffened, her hand instinctively going to the hilt of her blade. Her amber eyes narrowed as she debated her next move. Reveal herself now, or continue observing. A small smile spread across her lips. "Soon, human," she whispered. "But not yet. Let's see how much fight you really have." She faded into the shadows, her mind already crafting her next test. The jungle was alive with sound, but John focused on the silence between the noises. He moved cautiously, each step deliberate, his spear held tightly in his hand. He wasn't just walking, he was listening, feeling, waiting. The air around him felt heavier, charged with an unseen presence. "Still hiding," he muttered, scanning the canopy above. "Not for long." For days, he had sensed it, a shadow in the trees, a presence that felt sharper, more deliberate than the predators he'd faced. Whoever it was, they weren't just watching him, they were testing him, and he hated being a test subject. Velthara watched him from her perch high above, her amber eyes gleaming with anticipation. The human was unlike anything she'd studied before, resilient, cunning, and now challenging her. "Clever creature," she murmured. "You know I'm here." Her fingers brushed the hilt of her blade, its edge glinting faintly in the dappled sunlight. It would be so easy to strike now, to end the game with a single precise move. But where was the satisfaction in that? No, this human intrigued her. He was more than prey. He was a puzzle. And Velthara loved puzzles. "Let's see what you're really made of." John heard the faintest rustle above him and froze. His eyes flicked upward, his breath steady. The movement was subtle, too subtle for a predator that lived off instinct. This was different, calculated. "Finally," he said under his breath, gripping his spear tighter. He pivoted, raising his voice. "Come out already, or are you too afraid to face me?" The air seemed to hold its breath. Velthara grinned. Bold. She liked that. With a single leap, she descended from the canopy, landing silently a few meters in front of him. Her tall frame straightened, and she let the moment hang in the air as her gaze locked onto his. John stared, his grip on his spear tightening. She was unexpected. She stood well over 7 feet tall, her athletic build covered in sleek, ornate armor that shimmered with a faint iridescence. Her skin, a smooth bronze tone, contrasted sharply with her amber eyes, which burned with an intensity that pinned him in place. "Human," she said, her voice smooth yet edged with authority. "I was beginning to wonder if you'd ever notice me." John forced his expression to remain neutral. Hard not to notice when someone's been stalking you for days. "Stalking," she repeated, amused. "I prefer observing." Her words, her tone, it all grated against him, though not in the way he expected. There was no malice, no immediate threat. If anything, she sounded curious, even playful. That only made him more wary. "Who are you?" he demanded, leveling his spear. She tilted her head slightly, her gaze flicking to the weapon. "Velthara, Huntress of the Krenax." Her lips curled into a faint smile. "And you, human, have intrigued me." John snorted. "Not sure I like being someone's science project." Velthara's smile widened. "Oh, you're far more than that." Before he could respond, she moved. In a blur of motion, she closed the distance between them, her blade flashing toward him. John barely managed to parry the strike with his spear, the force of the blow nearly knocking him off balance. "So, this is how it is," he growled, his heart pounding as he steadied himself. "Think of it as an evaluation," Velthara said, circling him like a predator sizing up its prey. She struck again, and John deflected, using the shaft of his spear to redirect her blade. She was fast, inhumanly fast, and her strength was evident in every swing. But she wasn't just swinging blindly. Each strike was precise, calculated. John quickly realized brute force wouldn't save him. Instead, he focused on the terrain, retreating into denser underbrush where her size worked against her. He ducked and weaved, using the foliage to force her into awkward angles. Velthara's eyes gleamed with approval. "Clever," she murmured, "but cleverness only gets you so far." She feinted left, then pivoted right, her blade slicing through the air. John sidestepped, his movements quick and deliberate. He countered with a thrust of his spear, aiming for her exposed side, but she twisted gracefully, avoiding the blow. The fight was a dance, her speed and strength against his strategy and precision. John couldn't help but notice the way she moved, almost like she was testing him more than trying to kill him. That thought both unsettled and infuriated him. "You call this an evaluation?" he barked, narrowly dodging another strike. Velthara smirked. "You're still alive, aren't you?" John's frustration boiled over. With a sudden burst of speed, he dropped low, sweeping his leg out to catch her off balance. Velthara stumbled, her amber eyes widening in surprise. He seized the opportunity, thrusting his spear forward and knocking her blade from her hand. Within seconds, the spear's tip was at her throat. Velthara froze, a strange look crossing her face, not fear, but amusement. She looked up at him, her lips curving into a slow smile. "Well done, human," she said softly. "Better than I expected." John's chest heaved as he held the spear steady. "Good enough for you." Her smile widened. "More than good enough." For a moment neither moved, the jungle's sounds fading into the background. Then, slowly, John lowered the spear, though his muscles stayed taut, ready for anything. Velthara retrieved her blade, careful not to make any sudden movements. She studied him, her expression one of curious admiration. "Who taught you to fight like that?" she asked. John shrugged. "Life." Velthara chuckled. A simple answer, but not untrue. You intrigue me, John Cross. He stiffened at the sound of his name. How do you know who I am? She sheathed her blade, her amber eyes gleaming. I know more than you think, human, and I have plans for you. Plans? John's voice hardened. You're going to have to be more specific. Velthara turned, already retreating into the shadows. In time, she said, her voice almost teasing. For now, rest. You'll need it. And just like that, she was gone, leaving John alone in the jungle. But the weight of her presence lingered, filling him with a mixture of anger, curiosity, and something he couldn't quite place. The jungle night fell like a heavy curtain, its oppressive darkness broken only by the faint glow of bioluminescent plants. John had found a defensible spot, a rocky outcrop surrounded by dense foliage. A fire crackled in front of him, its light flickering across his sharp features. He sharpened the tip of his spear, his mind restless. The encounter with Velthara lingered in his thoughts. She was faster, stronger, and far more dangerous than anything he'd faced on this moon. Yet she hadn't killed him. Plans for me, he muttered, his voice edged with frustration. What the hell does that even mean? The jungle answered with its usual symphony of alien calls and rustling leaves. He scanned the darkness beyond the firelight, his senses sharp. Velthara wasn't the only threat out here, and if her presence meant anything, the stakes had just gotten higher. From the shadows, Velthara watched him, her amber eyes catching the firelight like twin embers. She had no intention of striking tonight. She simply observed, fascinated by the human's resilience. Still defiant, she murmured. Good. Her wrist device beeped softly, alerting her to movement in the area. A faint growl followed, a sound that made even Velthara's blood run cold. A Vornak, the apex predator of Orvin, for the Vornak was a massive, reptilian beast with a hide like plated armor and a maw filled with serrated teeth. It hunted indiscriminately, consuming anything in its path. Even the Krenax avoided the creature when possible. Velthara's fingers hovered over the hilt of her blade. This wasn't part of her plan. The human might be resourceful, but a Vornak was an entirely different challenge. John felt it before he saw it, a vibration in the ground, rhythmic and heavy. He stood slowly, spear in hand, his muscles coiling like springs. The firelight flickered as a shadow passed through the trees. Then came the roar. A guttural, earth-shaking sound that sent chills down John's spine. His grip tightened on his spear as the beast emerged from the shadows, its massive frame dwarfing anything he'd encountered before. Okay, he muttered, taking a step back. That's new. The Vornak's eyes glowed a sickly green, its armored hide glinting in the firelight. It let out another roar, charging toward him with terrifying speed. Velthara cursed under her breath. She leapt from her perch, landing gracefully a few feet away. John's eyes darted to her, a mix of confusion and irritation flashing across his face. You again, he barked. Perfect timing. You're welcome, she shot back, drawing her blade. The Vornak lunged, its claws tearing into the ground as it charged. Velthara moved first, slicing at the beast's flank. Her blade glanced off its armored hide, leaving a shallow mark but doing little damage. It's armor, John yelled, circling to the beast's other side. I noticed, Velthara snapped, her tone sharp but controlled. John's mind raced. The creature's hide was impenetrable, but every armor had weak points. Its movements were heavy and deliberate. Perhaps speed could outmaneuver it. Keep it busy, he shouted, darting toward a tree with low-hanging branches. Velthara hesitated for only a moment before nodding. She darted around the Vornak, slashing at its legs and tail, drawing its attention. The beast roared, swiping at her with claws the size of daggers, but she stayed just out of reach, her movements calculated and swift. John climbed the tree quickly, grabbing a sturdy branch and testing its weight. He glanced at the Vornak, calculating its trajectory. Bring it closer, he called out. Velthara raised an eyebrow but complied, taunting the beast with quick strikes that drew it toward John's position. The Vornak lunged, its jaws snapping inches from her. She rolled to the side, narrowly avoiding its teeth. Now, she yelled. John leapt from the branch, driving his spear into the Vornak's neck, where its armor plates overlapped. The beast let out a deafening roar, thrashing violently as blood sprayed from the wound. John clung tightly, using his weight to drive the spear deeper. Velthara seized the opportunity, plunging her blade into the exposed wound. With a final, guttural cry, the Vornak collapsed, its massive body hitting the ground with a resounding thud. John rolled off the beast, landing heavily on the ground. He pushed himself up, his chest heaving as he turned to Velthara. "You're not half bad," he said, wiping sweat from his brow. She smirked, her amber eyes glinting. "Neither are you, for a human." John chuckled dryly. "I guess I should say thanks for not letting me become dinner." Velthara sheathed her blade, her expression softening slightly. "You held your own. Not many would have." The moment hung in the air, the tension between them shifting. For the first time, John saw something in her that wasn't predatory respect. "You're full of surprises," he said, leaning against the tree. "And you," she replied, her tone thoughtful, "are full of potential." The fire crackled as they settled into an uneasy truce. For now, the jungle's dangers were behind them. But as Velthara watched the human, her thoughts wandered to the future. John Cross was more than she had expected, and for the first time, she questioned whether her mission was about him, or something much larger. The firelight danced across the rocky outcrop as John and Velthara sat in silence, the massive carcass of the Vornak lying just beyond the glow. Its metallic hide gleamed faintly, a grim reminder of the jungle's dangers. Yet for the first time in days, John felt something close to safety, albeit in the company of someone he couldn't entirely trust. "You could have let me die back there," John said, breaking the silence. His voice was calm, but his eyes remained sharp, observing her every movement. Velthara tilted her head, her gaze fixed on the fire. "That would have been inefficient." "In other words, I'm useful to you." John leaned back against the tree, his spear resting at his side. "Care to explain what your game is?" She smirked, her sharp teeth glinting faintly. "You assume this is a game, human. Perhaps I simply enjoy the challenge you present." John snorted. "Yeah, because people like you drop in unannounced to test survivalists all the time." Velthara's amber eyes flicked to him, her amusement giving way to something more serious. "You're more than a survivalist, John Cross. You're adaptable, resourceful. Qualities my people value." "Your people," John said, narrowing his eyes. "And who exactly are they?" For a moment, Velthara hesitated, as though weighing how much to reveal. Finally, she leaned forward, her voice low but steady. "I am Velthara, Huntress of the Krenax. My clan sent me to find what your kind call perfection. A genetic solution to a problem my people have faced for generations." John's brows furrowed. "Perfection? What's that supposed to mean?" "Our strength is waning," she admitted, her tone carrying a rare note of vulnerability. "Each generation weaker than the last. We need an infusion of something new, something strong. And you think I'm the answer to your problems," John said flatly. Velthara smiled faintly. "You might be." John let out a sharp laugh, the sound echoing in the quiet jungle. "So, let me get this straight. You came all this way to collect me like some kind of lab rat. Is that why you've been stalking me?" "Observing," Velthara corrected, though her tone lacked its usual sharpness. "I needed to ensure you were worthy." "Worthy of what?" John snapped, his frustration finally bubbling to the surface. "Being turned into some science experiment for your dying species." Velthara's expression hardened. "It's not that simple, human. You underestimate the importance of what you've proven here. Your adaptability, your resilience. These are traits we've lost. If you knew what was at stake, you'd understand." "Then why don't you explain it to me?" John challenged, his voice rising. "Because from where I'm sitting, it sounds like you think I'm nothing more than DNA on legs." Velthara stood abruptly, her towering form casting a shadow over him. Do you think this is easy for me? She hissed, her voice low but sharp. To come here, to face a creature like you, knowing what I must do. John rose to his feet, meeting her gaze. What you must do? Sounds to me like you're just following orders. Her amber eyes flared, but she said nothing. For a long moment, they stood in tense silence, the fire crackling between them. Finally, Velthara sighed, her shoulders relaxing. You're right, she admitted, her voice softer. I came here with orders, but you've made me question them. John blinked, caught off guard. What do you mean? She hesitated, as if the words were difficult to form. You're not what I expected, John Cross. You've challenged everything I was taught about humans, about what it means to be strong. He stared at her, unsure how to respond. For the first time, he saw something in her that went beyond the predatory edge she carried, something conflicted, almost human. What happens if I don't go along with your plan? He asked quietly. Velthara looked away, her jaw tightening. My clan won't give you a choice. They'll come for you, whether I will it or not. John's stomach sank. And you? Her gaze met his, and for a brief moment, there was no hostility, no calculation, only honesty. I don't know. The jungle seemed to press in closer, the weight of their conversation heavy in the air. John sat back down, staring into the fire. He felt like a pawn in a game he didn't fully understand. Yet Velthara's words carried a sincerity that made it hard to hate her. You don't seem like the type to blindly follow orders, he said after a long silence. Velthara smirked faintly, though it didn't reach her eyes. And you don't seem like the type to back down no matter the odds. They shared a brief, wary smile, the tension between them easing slightly. For now, they had reached a fragile understanding, but both knew the challenges ahead would test them in ways they couldn't yet imagine. The night deepened, the jungle around them falling into a rare lull. The fire crackled softly, its warmth a small reprieve against the heavy chill settling in the air. John sat cross-legged, his spear resting by his side. Across the fire, Velthara sat with her back straight, her amber eyes glowing faintly in the flickering light. They hadn't spoken in a while, the silence between them no longer tense, but thoughtful. Each was lost in their own musings, John trying to piece together his next move, Velthara grappling with the unexpected complications of her mission. Finally, John broke the quiet. You know, for someone who was sent to hunt me down, you're awfully talkative. Velthara tilted her head, a small smirk tugging at the corners of her lips. You've proven yourself more engaging than most prey. It's refreshing. John leaned forward, his brows furrowing. Pray, that's still how you see me. Her smirk faded, replaced by something softer. Not anymore. John studied her, the firelight dancing across her sharp features. She was alien in every sense of the word, taller, stronger, with an aura of power that made her presence almost suffocating. And yet, there was something undeniably human in the way her gaze softened when she looked at him. You're not what I expected either, he admitted, his voice quieter. When you first showed up, I thought you were just another threat. But now, he trailed off, unsure how to finish. Velthara raised an eyebrow. Now, he hesitated, then shook his head. Let's just say you're full of surprises. Velthara chuckled softly. Coming from you, that feels like a compliment. The fire crackled between them, its warmth drawing them closer. Velthara shifted, leaning forward slightly, her sharp features illuminated by the glow. You are unique, John Cross, she said, her voice low. Among my people, strength is everything. Power, dominance, control. Yet you've shown me something we have long forgotten. Resilience. Adaptability. John shrugged. Survival isn't about being the strongest. It's about finding a way, no matter how bad things get. Her amber eyes locked onto his, intense and unwavering. And that, human, is why you fascinate me. John felt his pulse quicken under her gaze, though he couldn't tell if it was from caution or something deeper. He leaned back slightly, trying to mask his unease. You've got a funny way of showing it. Testing me with skirls? Throwing me into a fight with a Vornak? Velthara smirked. You survived, didn't you? More than that, you thrived. You proved yourself worthy. Worthy of what? He asked, his voice edged with frustration. Because if this is still about your mission, I'm not interested in being anyone's trophy. Velthara's expression softened, and for the first time, she looked almost hesitant. It's no longer just about the mission, John. The words hung in the air, heavy with meaning. John stared at her, trying to read the emotions flickering across her face. She wasn't just a huntress, not anymore. She was something more complicated, more conflicted. You're serious, aren't you? He said finally. Velthara nodded, her amber eyes never leaving his. I came here to follow orders. But you've made me question everything I thought I knew. Her admission left him momentarily speechless. He had expected manipulation, maybe even pity. But not this. Not honesty. I don't know what to say to that, he admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. Then don't say anything, Velthara replied, her voice soft. She moved closer, her presence filling the space between them. John felt his breath hitch as her hand reached out, brushing lightly against his. Her touch was cool, but it sent a warmth coursing through him that he couldn't explain. This is new for me too, she admitted, her voice tinged with vulnerability. But I can't ignore it. John swallowed hard, his mind racing. Every instinct told him to pull away, to keep his guard up. But something in her eyes, something raw and unguarded, kept him rooted in place. This doesn't make any sense, he said, shaking his head. You're you, and I'm just some guy trying to survive. Velthara smiled faintly. Survival is what makes you remarkable. You see a challenge, and you overcome it. No hesitation, no doubt. Her words struck something deep within him, a part of himself he rarely acknowledged. He looked at her, really looked at her, and saw not just a predator but a person, someone who had been shaped by expectations she no longer wanted to carry. John reached out hesitantly, his hand brushing against hers. The connection was electric, unspoken but undeniable. The distance between them vanished. Velthara leaned in, her face inches from his. John's breath caught as her amber eyes searched his, their intensity softened by something he couldn't quite name. Are you afraid of me, John Cross? She whispered. He shook his head slowly. Not anymore. And then the space between them disappeared entirely. The fire burned low as the night deepened, the jungle's sounds fading into the background. For a brief moment, there was no mission, no danger. Only the connection between two souls who had found each other in the unlikeliest of places. The peace of the jungle didn't last. The hum of approaching Krenak's hovercrafts broke the stillness, the sound growing louder with every passing second. John and Velthara stood side by side, their bond forged by survival, but their alliance about to be tested. They found me, Velthara said grimly, her hand resting on the hilt of her blade. John's grip on his spear tightened. My clan, she admitted, her tone heavy. They've come to claim you, and to ensure I fulfilled my mission. John scowled. Let me guess, they're not big on negotiation? Not unless you count surrender or die, she replied, her lips twisting into a humorless smile. The hovercrafts landed, their sleek forms gleaming as a group of armored Krenak's warriors disembarked. Leading them was an imposing figure with sharp features and a voice that echoed with authority. Velthara, the figure called out. You've delayed long enough. Where is the human? Velthara stepped forward, her posture rigid. He's not coming with you, Lornak. The envoy sneered. You defy the matriarch. Your duty. John stepped beside her, his voice steady. She's not alone in this. The envoy's expression darkened. Then you'll die together. The battle that followed was a whirlwind of chaos. John and Velthara fought side by side, their movements seamless despite their differences. She moved with lethal precision, her blade flashing in the dim jungle light, while John used the terrain and his spear to outwit the Krenak's warriors. Despite their combined strength, the odds were overwhelming. John could feel exhaustion creeping in, but Veltharah's presence kept him focused. "We can't hold them off forever," he shouted, deflecting a strike with his spear. Veltharah met his gaze, a glint of determination in her eyes. "We don't need to, just long enough to make them question their orders." Her words proved prophetic. As the battle dragged on, the Krenak's warriors faltered, their unity disrupted by the unexpected ferocity of the human and their own discontent with the mission. The envoy, realizing the tide had turned, barked an order for retreat. As the jungle fell silent once more, John leaned against a tree, his chest heaving. Veltharah stood beside him, her blade dripping with blood. "Well," John said between breaths, "that wasn't exactly the plan." Veltharah smirked faintly. "You're alive. That's enough." The weight of what had just happened settled over them. Veltharah had openly defied her clan, and John had fought a battle he never asked for. "What happens now?" he asked, his voice quieter. Veltharah looked toward the horizon, her amber eyes reflecting the faint glow of dawn. "I've chosen my path," she said firmly. "One that doesn't involve blind obedience to a failing system." John raised an eyebrow. "And where does that leave me?" She turned to him, a rare softness in her gaze. "With me, if you'll have it." John studied her, the weight of her words sinking in. He thought of everything they had endured together, the battles, the truths revealed, the bond they'd formed. "Guess I'm stuck with you," he said, a small smile tugging at his lips. Veltharah chuckled. "You say that like it's a bad thing." Together, they began their journey away from the jungle, leaving behind the shadows of their past. For John, it was a leap into the unknown. For Veltharah, it was a step toward rewriting her people's future. And for both of them, it was a chance to create something entirely new.